was arrested for trying to kill one of the Hanhala. Yeah, like he really wanted to get back at, I guess the guy is sitting now. Yeah. Well, that's really a very unusual thing. Okay, so, all right. Halacha hey. Asur lahayid bedavar shelo ra'a ba'atzmo. You're never allowed to testify about something that you didn't see yourself. And of course, that's how rumors get started, right? Afal pisha amar lo adam sheyodea bo sheinu mishaker la'olam. Even if the person who told you is someone who you know never lies. This person's word is golden. He never embellishes nothing. You're still not allowed to testify because you didn't see it yourself. Va'afilu im amar lo bo va'amod im eid echad sheyesh li v'lo toyid rak sheyifchad ba'al dini. He says, and even if your friend asks you to, he says, listen, you know it happened because, so-and-so told you, so you know his word is solid. Just, I know you can't act as a witness, but come with me and the other guy who actually saw the transaction so that we can intimidate the other side because he'll see that I have two witnesses. It's not true, right? He says that's usher to do also. You can't participate in that ruse because it's not real. Okay, so let's take a look at the Imrei Yaakov. Shelo ra'a ba'atzmo. You can't participate in something that you didn't see yourself. The Mashanemar b'Torah o ra'a o yada. He says that the Torah says that you're allowed to testify if you saw it or you know it. So what does the word "you know it" mean? Okay, Yediya zu hainu dafka al pi atzmo shel loveh. That means that you know it because the borrower told you explicitly, I owe so-and-so money. Now, if you didn't see a loan, but Reuven lent Shimon $1,000, and Shimon tells you, I borrowed $1,000 from Reuven, then you're allowed to testify that Shimon owes the $1,000 to Reuven. That's what yada means, you know it. Not because you saw any exchange of cash, but you know it because Shimon admitted, the debtor admitted that he owes the money. Shahodalo b'fanav b'hoda gemura o amar atem edai. Or if he said, you are my witnesses that I borrowed $1,000 from Reuben. So that's what o ra'a o yada. Either you saw the transaction, the exchange of funds, or you know because the guy openly admitted that he owes him $1,000. And so, but your friend tells you, who's the creditor, he says, come anyway. Let's intimidate the guy. He'll think that you're one of my witnesses. He says, that you're not allowed to do because the Torah says, distance yourself from sheker, from falsehood. He says, maybe based on your presence, the debtor will try to just pay the guy off because he doesn't want to go through the process based on. Maybe in reality, he feels justified in not paying back the money for whatever reason that you may not be privy to. But your presence of intimidation is asur al pi halacha because that may cause an outcome that isn't correct. Okay. Next, so I think those two things are fairly clear. Let's go on to the next halacha. And by the way, you see that these are examples of situations that can occur even outside of base. Right? Come with me. I want you to come with me so that I can put pressure on the guy who owes me money. So under certain circumstances, I could hear where that's perfectly okay. Let's say the guy owes you money and you have a friend who maybe the guy who owes me money wouldn't be embarrassed to blow me off, but he would be embarrassed to blow off this elder statesman, who he respects, and would be embarrassed to, despite his very presence. So there's no misrepresentation there. I'm going to take the rabbi with me so that we can settle this, okay? So I would say to the guy, is it true that his claim that you owe money, you haven't paid him? Is it true you made a pledge and you haven't paid up your pledge? How could such a thing be? How could such a thing happen? That you committed yourself to pay something and you didn't pay it? Yeah. Okay. All right. So that I could hear would be okay. But to represent yourself as a witness when you're not, that's not permitted. Okay, let's go on. Vav. Yes.
My son is in a situation as a lawyer, and has a situation where he's owed money by some guys in Montreal. He's here in Toronto. He was doing work for them, and they're not paying. And so, if he wants to, they're just ignoring him and everything.
Yeah.
So, does he have the option of doing it in Toronto, or does he have to go to Montreal where they are to the bank?
Oh, I see what you're saying. To summon them to a base.
Yeah.
It's a good question. Normally, the protocol, if I'm not mistaken, is to sue them in the jurisdiction where they are located. But if they're willing to come to Toronto, yeah. Oh, you're familiar with the case?
No, I don't want to say anything. No.
Actually, there's somebody who's on the Zoom now who's very familiar with the case, because it's a company that's based in Europe. Their ownership is in Canada. A lot of ownership is in Canada.
Uh-huh.
The work was done. They're European companies, but the money's here in Canada.
Yeah.
So it was hired here from Canadian guys.
Yeah. I mean, that's the usual protocol. But yeah, he should get it. First of all, the first thing he should do is, I mean, if I was advising him, I would tell him to get in touch with the rabbi of these guys, and say, listen, I'm really, these guys owe me money. They're not returning my calls. They're blowing me off. I want to take them to Beis Din, but can I ask you to please speak to them to avoid this whole unpleasant thing? Maybe the rabbi can do something. Maybe they will acknowledge to the rabbi that they owe the money, but they can't pay it right now or whatever it is. Okay, and if that
it's their option though, where they want to have it, or is it my son's option?
the defendant usually has the prerogative to choose to choose a closer Beis Din to him. That's usually if I'm recalling correctly, unless there are mitigating circumstances, like Moshe said that if the whole transaction took place in the place of the plaintiff, then that could mitigate it. I don't know. Okay, Eid Kosher sheyodea b'chavero shuhu rasha upasal leidus min haTorah. So, I am a witness to a transaction, but I know I have a friend who may have also witnessed the transaction, but he is a rasha. He's not kosher for eidus. He's disqualified to be an aid. Ve'ein hadayonim makirim risho, and the judges are not aware that he's a rasha, like he's living a double life. On Shabbos, he shows up, comes on time to shul, puts the talis over his head. But I also know that he has another girlfriend, somewhere that he keeps hidden away. and he leads a double life, and he gambles in Vegas and all of these other things. So I know that he's not a kosher witness. This is just purely a hypothetical. So Asr Lo, yeah, Asr Lo Lahayid Imo. So it is forbidden to be a co-witness with this person. You're not allowed to, even if the Beis Din is not aware. They think he's a from a Yid. They think everything is fine. But I know otherwise. I can't testify with him. Afal pishahu edus emes, even though the testimony is true. Shenamar al tashas yadcha imrasha lihiyos eid chamas, because the Torah says, do not stick your hand into a collaboration with a wicked person to be a crooked witness. Ki gzeras melechi shekol ha'edus betela afilu him rabim im yesh b'neim psul echad. So it's divine decree. It's God's will that even if you have 100 people who saw a transaction, but one out of the 100 is a Russia, is not kosher for Edus, that disqualifies the entire testimony. That's a Gzeres HaKasser. Doesn't necessarily make sense why that should be, and that's why the Shulchan Aruch Harav writes it in this language. But, and we'll talk about in a moment who is puzzle for Edus. We'll explain it in a moment, right? We'll see in a moment what makes you puzzle for Edus, what turns you into a halachic Russia. Okay, so even though you know that this guy is going to be telling the truth in this particular instance, but he leads a double life and he has the status of a Russia, you're not allowed to testify with him. You have to recuse yourself. And if the Beis Din summons you and they ask you, how can you not testify? You have to say, because the other person that's being called to testify is not kosher la'edus. And I'm not allowed to, according to the Torah. I'm not allowed to participate with him in this testimony. So how can you say such a thing? He's got such a sterling character and such a big bal tzedakah and does all of these wonderful things. To say, listen, Rabbi Isai, I happen to know certain things about him that make him not kosher la'edus. I don't think it's permissible to actually reveal that to the Beis Din unless they press you. But that's okay. So let's.
You mentioned yesterday about the deaf person and the mute person. Now we've got technology. So he was deaf before, but he got a cochlear implant, so now he can hear. Or he could speak before, but he needed a laryngectomy. So now he can't speak because he doesn't have a larynx.
Yes. So that's a very good question.
Interesting.
What defines a person being capable for Edus? What happens if when he, first of all, the whole idea of a person not being a kosher witness if he's mute or deaf arguably does not apply anymore. Just like the halachas in the Gemara that talk about a cheresh, a deaf mute, as not being able to count for a minyan and as not being chayiv in mitzvahs, that's no longer true. We have methods even before the cochlear implants. There are many poskim who had said that if a person is capable of communication through sign language or and other means, then he is then his halachic status can change. So you're right, Warren. Sometimes these halachas are not in sync, but if a person is simply not kosher le'edus for other reasons, so then like the halacha that we were learning before, what was right? So what was it called? We talked about kol haroy labila. You have to let's see. Right, you have to be able to testify with your mouth. So I don't know whether nowadays the halacha would change about being able to testify with your mouth. It could still be that for edus the bar is raised. Let's say a person is no longer capable of speaking, had a laryngectomy or something like that. I don't know. It sounds like that halachically he's not capable of being a witness anymore. But maybe there are ways around it that the post can discuss. I don't know. Yeah.
Going back 10 years.
Mitchell Sutton, who's a member of our shul who does a lot of sign language, he showed me recently that the OU came out with a booklet of halachas for deaf people, deaf mute people, and what their halachic status is. So it's worth, you can ask Mitchell if you want to know more details. Yeah, maybe that would mitigate the situation. No, it's the same thing as far as I know. Someone could be pasul le'edus for a medical reason. They could be pasul le'edus for their moral behavior, their moral turpitude.
The other side, puzzle is puzzle.
Pasul is pasul. No, you're either kosher or pasul.
Right.
There's no subjective definition of a rasha. There's a halachic definition of a rasha. Yeah, that is going to come up, right? Just because you think the guy is
sure if I qualify.
Chas v'shalom.
In terms of Kohanim, is the deafness or muteness an issue for a Kohen?
As far as duchening, I believe it's an interesting question. A Kohen has to be able to say kol ram, has to be able to say with his voice. There are disqualifications in the Shulchan Aruch if a Kohen is no longer capable of, let's say, lifting his hands, or is no longer capable of projecting his voice, then he's no longer permitted to duchen. Yeah. And that happens, unfortunately, as people get older. Kohen can't lift his hands, or he has Parkinson's, he can't hold his hands any longer. So he shouldn't duchen, he should go outside during duchen. Yeah, so there's a lot of halachos that revolve around physical disabilities, yeah. Okay, so it's a gzeras hakasav, it's God's decree that any testimony, any group of witnesses are disqualified if even one of them is pasul. So you're not allowed to participate. So let's take a look now at the Rav Shulchan Aruch. Afal pi shehu edus emes. Even if you know the testimony is true, perish lomi baya beedus deboinan bo davka shnayim kagon ede kiddushin. He says this is not only true with testimony that requires two witnesses. Let's say you're called, your friend is making a wedding and he wants to honor you with being one of the Eidei Kiddushin. So you say, well, who's the other guy? He says, oh, it's Yankel. And you know Yankel is leading this double life, and halachically he qualifies as a rasha. So you're not allowed to, you can't say, oh, well, it's none of my business.
What's the problem of one asked, or the fact that you're joining him?
The fact that you're joining him. I mean, the guy making the simcha may not be aware that the guy's a rasha. He thinks he's a fine guy. He has children with him every Shabbos at Kiddush. Okay. Okay.
Oh, your uncle is Yah? So I guess that's what.
Okay, then it doesn't work at
all.
all.
They always say you should have kosher like Ramban and don't get some people.
Yeah. I find myself being asked much less these days to be an Eid Kiddushin. I suppose. Anyway, Shahamakadesh bifnei Eid echad ein choshen lekidushav. He says, because obviously if a person performs an act of kiddushin under the chuppah with only one witness, it's not a valid kiddushin. Afilu im shneim hu v'hi. Even if the bride and the groom acknowledged that they wanted to get married, it's not a valid kiddushin. I will tell you, there was a case a few years back where a Rav paskined for a guy in my shul who was a Kohen that he was allowed to marry this woman who was married with children and then divorced on the basis that her initial marriage did not have, one of the witnesses was a Machalal Shabbos. Well, that one I haven't heard. That's interesting. Really? All right. So based on the fact that one of the witnesses was a Machalal Shabbos, she was never married, and therefore the divorce wasn't a divorce. And therefore, as a Kohen, he could choose to marry her and still retain his Kohen.
What would the status
Doesn't,
be?
the children are still, the children are not mamzerim. They're not. Okay, child born out of wedlock is still 100% Jewish. There's no stigma. Today, there's no. No. So anyway, so there's no halachic shul on a child born out of wedlock. It's a kosher child as long as it's not a mamzer. There's an issue of a ben nida, right? But that was not the issue. The issue here was she permitted to a kohen, right? And so was she? So it also it was one of those situations where some of the rabbanim were very upset that this heter was being relied upon, but he got the heter. I told him, look, I can't stand in your way. I did not participate. Did not officiate at the wedding. I felt too uncomfortable because it was really relying on some kind of very, very tenuous loophole. It was from Rav Gedalia Schwartz. He gave the psak. Yeah, it's from Livracha. Yeah.
Rabbi, do you use the that heter? There is a situation of an aguna.
Yes, they used it to be matur and aguna also. Exactly, Shmuel. Yeah, so there are times when this actually has been employed. Okay. Uchegon hamocher sadehu be'edim de'ena govim imishabdi elahecha shemachru lo bifnei shnei edim. Here's another circumstance, not having to do with marriage. A guy engages in a transaction, sells his field with witnesses. Hamocher sadehu be'edim de'eno govim imishabdi elahecha shemachru lo bifnei shnei edim. So if I made a legitimate purchase and then someone else is claiming that land, I can't substantiate my claim of being the original purchaser unless I have two witnesses. Someone else is living on that property. I have a witnesses that I purchased the property, but if I don't have two witnesses, I can't stake my claim of al bifnei echad lo. Afal pi she'ha'inyan emes, even if it's true, but I have no two witnesses, I can't support my claim. So not only is it true that you can't participate with a Russia as an aid in a situation where two witnesses are required, but even in a situation where one witness's testimony is sufficient, you are not allowed to testify in partnership with a person who's a Russia, because his presence cancels all of the testimony completely. So, for example, if someone testifies in a situation where there are three witnesses, but the three of us come together to Beis Din, and we say that such and such transaction took place, and later it's discovered that one of the three is not kosher le'edus, either he's a relative or he's a Russia, or for whatever reason he's pasul, then the entire testimony is thrown out of court, even though you still have two kosher witnesses. The fact that we have grouped ourselves together as three people coming together to testify that we were all together, then that person's testimony invalidates the other two people's testimony. Kiditnan b'makos, and this is a Gemara in Maseches Makos on Daf Hey. Arei da'af shenisharu shnei edim ksherim mikol makom gzeras akasavu dim yesh eid echad pasul but lakol ha'edus. It's a divine decree, which means that it doesn't necessarily make sense, but it's a divine decree that even if you're left with two kosher witnesses, but you have a third or a fourth or a fifth who's pasul, that pasul invalidates the entire group. Let me just finish these last two lines. Hu hadin vazeh afsheh inyan emes, and that's even if their testimony is true. No one's trying to perpetrate fraud. Gzeras hakasavu kevin sheyesh imo eid pasal hedus, betela va'asur lahayid imo. It still invalidates the testimony, and therefore I'm not even permitted to participate in it, because if I do participate in it, I violate Torah. Not only is my testimony thrown out, but I've also committed an aveira by aligning myself with a person who's not kosher for Eidos. Yes, Paul. Well, that's the issue, is that that's exactly the reason why the some people who are Mesader Kedushin require the Chassan to explicitly designate these two to be his exclusive witnesses. Why his exclusive witnesses? Because other people are watching, mom and dad are watching from both sides. Both, all parents, all siblings are pasal edus. If they were to be called to testify, and there was a consideration that they were all witnesses, that would disqualify the two witnesses. That's a perfect example of why, this halacha. That's a great instance of where, that's the basis for the minhag, to have him specify that you are my exclusive witnesses.
But financial transaction today, doesn't everything really go by the star or some sort of documents of some sort? That's what we really go by. That's what the government recognizes, what the law recognizes, everything. Not really so much by AD, like in financial transactions.
Well, I don't know about, I'm not well versed enough in secular law to tell you whether witnesses to a transaction are enough to substantiate it, but there are many instances where you could create a financial debt through just witnesses. I saw a car accident, and I saw the guy crash into the other guy. So the other guy says, it wasn't my fault. Yeah, but of course it's your fault. You blew the red light. The court may ask me to testify. So clearly, even in secular law, certainly it's true in Torah law, but even in secular law, where there's financial liability, not necessarily in the world of business transactions, I don't know, but there are many instances where you can create financial liability through eyewitness testimony, right? It could be a problem. That's why the Beis Din has to verify the identity of the witnesses and ask them, are you related in any way to either litigant? Well, that's the halacha, is that if one of them is pasal, you have to ask him not to testify. He may not testify in Beis Din.
Killing a guy, and all of a sudden witness comes to court, and then comes whatever he does. The fact that he was kosher prior.
That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know what the halacha is. If when he witnessed it, he was a kosher guy, and now he's not kosher leidus. I think that the halacha is that you look at his status currently. You look at his current status, right? Yes, that's what we're learning. That's it. Clearly, that's the halacha. You have to recuse yourself and say, "I'm sorry, I can't be a witness."
Why you can't be a witness?
Tricky. Yeah, tricky. If it's just a matter of the guy not being Shomer Shabbos, right? Yeah, that's not a Russia. Like, for example, there are people who come to the bayit every Shabbos. You wouldn't know. You would assume guy davens at the bayit is Shomer Shabbos. I happen to know that there are some people who come to the bayit every Shabbos and drive and go and are not Shomer Shabbos. If I was asked to be a witness with them, I would have to say to the person making the simcha, I'm really sorry, this person is not a Shomer Shabbos. I don't believe that that's Lashon Hara, especially not in today's world. I'm sorry, he's not. He may There may be political fallout. There may be hurt feelings. So that has to be maneuvered properly. And you have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Okay. Well, it depends on the circumstance. Maybe you'd have to do like a second chuppah in the back in the rabbi's office with two kosher witnesses, just to